Hey there, it's Steve from Serious Keto, and this is the Not So Serious Keto video podcast. I hope to keep the energy level up for this podcast. I am pretty tired. Lately, I have been suffering through what I call sudden onset insomnia. I fall asleep really easily and sleep for about 4 hours. And then I wake up and I stay awake until morning. Actually, I do tend to fall asleep right about 5:30 generally, but that means I'm usually awake. It can be anywhere from midnight to 2 a.m. when I wake up, and then I'm awake, like I said, till about 5:30. And just as I'm starting to doze, we have one really annoying cat. Actually, they're both kind of annoying, but one is especially annoying, and he'll start this wailing meow. It reminds me of in Empire Strikes Back when Han Solo is still outside on the planet Hoth and they close the doors and Chewbacca's like, "Woo!" I know that didn't sound like Chewbacca, but that's what my cat sounds like. He will just keep doing that until he gets whatever it is that he wants, whether that's a different food, because he already has food, so he wants something different, or he wants to go outside, or something. So basically, I've been operating on about 4 hours of sleep for the past week, maybe a little bit longer. I'm not sure what's causing it. When I wake up, my mind starts racing. Sometimes it's about serious keto and what's a recipe I could do. And as a result, I'm always taking my phone and putting in notes at 3 in the morning for ideas for recipes, things like that. Anyhow, I have some super duper concentrated iced coffee, and hopefully that'll punch me through today. I got a lot of recipes I want to work on. Speaking of recipes, that is going to be my first topic today. In fact, it may be my only topic today if I wind up kind of segueing into different aspects of recipes. The first thing I want to cover is sort of a question that I get an awful lot, which is, when is such and such coming? Like, when is the hot dog bun coming? When is the cookbook coming? Why is it taking so long? And there's a handful of reasons why it takes me as long as it does to get some recipes and videos made. First and foremost, I wouldn't say that I'm a perfectionist, but I have pretty high standards for any recipe that I'm going to put the Serious Keto name on. I've tried a lot of keto recipes back before I started up this channel, and what they tended to have in common was a really gorgeous thumbnail that looked nothing like the final product. There was the content creator who was just fawning all over how great this dish, whatever it is. And then you make it and it doesn't come out anything like it. It doesn't taste remotely like a legitimate food item. It tastes like keto food. And one of the things that I really strive for whenever I'm making a recipe is I want non-keto people to eat it and think, wow, that's amazing. That's keto? Seriously? No pun intended. So I do a lot of iterations on a recipe. And as I said in one of my previous videos, the hardest part is that last 5%, when you're just almost there and you think, all I gotta do is swap one more ingredient. I just gotta figure out what it is and I'll be there and it will be wonderful and then I can make a video. That is really the most dangerous place in a recipe. That is the place where I have had some of my most serious setbacks. Sort of a corollary to the whole I do a bunch of iterations is I'm one person. So it's not like America's Test Kitchen where I've got all these people behind me all working on different variations of the same recipe so that then we can very rapidly find out which one works. There's just me. So there's the time aspect of it all. It takes time. I don't get a whole lot of time when the kitchen is available, and that will be probably next week's podcast when I talk about being keto in a non-keto family. But I get a very small window of time in the kitchen where I can do recipes, where I can film, etc. And lastly, all of these recipe failures or learning experiences, if we want to put a positive spin on it, I still wind up eating those. Again, since I'm just one person here, and if I'm eating it as a failure, it hasn't hit my threshold where the family wants to eat it because it doesn't taste keto. So I'm the only one eating it, And if it's, pancakes, for example, I make a batch of pancakes, I get 6 pancakes, that's 3 servings, that's 3 days in a row of eating pancakes for me before I'm ready to make the next batch. Or I start to freeze a bunch of things. That's what happened with the hamburger buns that I had done. I still have a freezer full of hamburger buns in various states of goodness. So you put all that together and it takes me a while to get some recipes out the door. Furthermore, and you've probably noticed this if you watch my channel on a regular basis, sometimes I will sort of get into a groove or a theme and do a series of videos that are sort of related. I did this with almonds, and we had the blanched almond butter, we had almond milk, almond flour, and then I pulled it together into a shortcake chaffle that used both the almond flour. I think it used everything, now that I think about it. So when I get on one of those sort of rolls, it's very hard for me to disengage. I get sort of obsessive about seeing what all I can do along a given theme, which means probably later this week there will be a follow-up video to the pancake video from last week, where I'm probably going to do some waffles, look at doing bulk pancakes or bulk mixing of the dry ingredients, and then calculate how much you would scoop out and make 2 pancakes, 3 pancakes. Basically make it so that you do the dry ingredients once and you're set for a while, and then it's very scalable. So that's probably going to come this week, and by doing that, that pushes other things a little bit further back in the pipeline. Now, one of the things that does help from time to time is when I collaborate with one of my executive channel members. And there have been some instances like the hamburger buns that I did with Don, aka Calgary Guy, and the pancakes that I did with Aaron Bailey, where we just go back and forth, iterating on the recipe, swapping out ingredients, seeing what we get, taking pictures, sending them to each other. That's helpful, and maybe I can figure out a way to make that a broader thing, where if I have an idea for a recipe, I can share it, and we can have some sort of a community forum, perhaps out on Serious Keto, where people can volunteer to try different variations on the recipe and share their results. So who knows? Maybe that'll come one day. Another question that I get an awful lot is, how do I develop recipes? It's an interesting question. I think it's sort of similar to songwriting. I've wondered which comes first, the music or the lyrics, or do they kind of work in tandem? It's often the same way with creating a recipe. First, there is the impetus to create a recipe. What is that spark that makes me want to try a particular recipe? And that inspiration can come from different sources. Oftentimes, it'll be me flipping through Food and Wine magazine or Milk Street magazine, or maybe I'm watching a cooking show, which generally is limited to America's Test Kitchen or Milk Street, or Mexico One Plate at a Time with Rick Bayless. That's about all I watch. I'm sort of a PBS cooking show kind of guy. Because it seems like on those shows, it's really more about the food than the TV personality. A lot of the stuff on Food Network, it's just everybody wants to be a food celebrity. I think that the recipe should be the star of the show. And I hope I kind of convey that in my videos when I'm doing the cooking, that I'm really just sort of the master of ceremonies. The recipe is the star. I intro it, I make it, I taste it, I say thank you for watching. So it could be a cooking show or a magazine, or something out of a cookbook, my extensive collection of cookbooks. And sometimes it is keto ready. You look at a recipe. There was a great one, this shrimp and feta that I saw on Milk Street a week or two ago, and I thought, wow, that's keto right there. I could do that with no modifications, pretty quick, pretty easy. I could make a video out of that. I give Milk Street credit, win-win. But for me, it becomes more fun when a recipe isn't keto ready, and I need to figure out how to make it keto. And I mentioned this in one of my previous videos. Very early on, something that I thought would be an ongoing feature on this channel was me reviewing each month's Milk Street magazine or Food and Wine magazine and talking about how keto ready or keto friendly it is. And we've got the aforementioned totally keto ready recipes. Then we have the ones that require 1 or 2 substitutions. Generally, I find these tend to fall in the category of starches or sweeteners or rice, those sort of things, that are a pretty easy swap out. Those are fun, but where the real fun comes in are the recipes that I call keto challenging. These are ones that are going to require 3 or more ingredient swaps. And they can be potentially things that aren't real regular in most people's pantries. And I know some of you probably roll your eyes whenever I get into those videos because you're like, oh great, another product I need to buy to make Steve happy and to do his recipe. But there's just something that to me feels really, really super cool when you can take something that maybe no one thought about being keto and turn it into something keto. It's a lot of fun. It's a challenge because some of them you start getting into, say, some sugar-free syrups, for example, that may use sucralose or some other sweetener that isn't super, super clean keto. Or you start getting into some of the things that the really purist keto people frown upon, you know, oat fiber, vital wheat gluten, for example. And on some of these, I kind of need to make a decision. If they start getting a little too dirty, do I even want to make a video out of it? Or do I just want to make sure that I call it low carb and don't call it keto? So those are some considerations I make when I'm modifying a recipe. Another source of inspiration for recipes is when I get either requests, which I get pretty much constantly, or my own personal cravings. For me, I don't have a huge craving for sweets. When I do some of these recipes for sweets, for fat bombs and things like that, I do them because I know that there are a lot of people out there who it could be a make or break for them staying on keto, whether or not they have something to satisfy that sweetness craving. I do like having sweets around the house periodically, keto sweets that is, just because I live in a non-keto household and there's always a bunch of junk food around. Cookies, crackers, donuts, etc. And for me then, these fat bombs are a lifesaver. But I don't crave them regularly. The things that I do crave tend to be those wheat-based type products. I love bread. I loved baking bread back when I was pre-keto. I like crackers, I like chips, I like pasta, I love pizza. And for a lot of these formerly wheat-based products that were part of my life, there just aren't a lot of spectacular recipes out there. So that combination of the craving and just this sort of dissatisfaction I've had with a lot of the recipes out there, that's a big motivating force for me to create recipes. For the most part, I don't make a lot of other keto channel recipes. Part of that is I don't have the time to be watching other people's recipes. I'd rather work on my own. There are a few channels that I really like. I mentioned last week Papa G, and I look forward to doing some sort of collaboration with him. I've mentioned Vernaz before and how her use of paneer has really inspired a lot of experimentation that I've done. But generally, I don't go to other YouTube channels unless I'm just clueless on something. Like marshmallows. I've never made marshmallows before. Found a keto recipe, tried making marshmallows. They were interesting. And maybe that's my starting point. I try something, it's not exactly what I'm looking for, and then I start to play around and I start to iterate with it. There have been recipes that I tried very early on in my YouTube days that were not what I expected, but gave me an idea for something else. An example of this is I had tried, I think it was a flatbread recipe, and just something about the texture made me think, if this were a little bit thicker, it might have the texture of a McGriddle. And I kept playing around with the recipe until I got the texture right. And once I had the texture and I thought, wow, this really has the mouthfeel of a McGriddle, then I started working on the flavor. So sort of the music versus the lyrics right there. And by the time I'd actually gotten to the McGriddle, it had almost zero resemblance whatsoever to the original recipe. Otherwise, I would have given the person credit. But I think the only ingredient that I wound up using was the psyllium husk powder that this person used in the original recipe. It was probably my first ever use of psyllium husk powder. Lots of times if I'm trying out a new baking ingredient, I will use the chaffle as my sort of, I don't know, mini laboratory, because I know that if it's horrible, the worst thing that happens is I'm throwing away 1 egg and a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup of mozzarella. So for me, that's a great way to see how given ingredients behave as they're exposed to heat. And for those channel members that are the sous chef or executive chef level, they've seen me do my monthly kitchen live stream where I do these sort of experiments. I will try out an ingredient just on a spoon, which oftentimes can result in a little bit of comedy because some of these things are not meant to be eaten straight up off a spoon. But yeah, the mini dash definitely comes in handy when I'm trying out baking recipes. Now, besides ingredients, another thing that I think a lot of cooks don't take into account is the impact of time and temperature and humidity and altitude. All of these can play a role in a recipe. If I'm baking something, I'll play around too with a recipe in terms of, am I baking it at 350 Fahrenheit? Am I baking it at 400 Fahrenheit? How long did I let the ingredients hydrate or rise? This can have a lot of impact on the texture of a batter or a dough. So I think when some of the people asked this question, how do you develop a recipe? Maybe they were thinking that since I'm a former process excellence guy, that I had sort of a standard work checklist of things that I go through to make a recipe, but it's really a lot more organic than all of that. It can come from so many different sources, so many different types of inspiration, and many times I will be just ready to give up on a recipe. And then I have one of my insomnia things and I come up with an idea and I think, wow, that's something I should totally try. Let's see what happens. This is actually what happened with adding guar gum to that pancake recipe that I released last week. Couldn't sleep. Decided I'd take a look at my phone, which is probably the worst thing to do when you can't sleep because you're probably getting blue light or something like that. But it is interesting how my Google newsfeed just seems to know how to feed me certain articles at the times I need them. And there was an article on guar gum versus xanthan gum. It's like magic. It scares me sometimes how much Google seems to know about me and what I want. But found this article, very good article on guar gum, decided, let's give guar gum a try. And it managed to give me the moisture and thickness and texture that I wanted out of the pancake. So sometimes it's just serendipity that a recipe comes out. That's my method, if you want to call it that. And then kind of to tie these two questions together, why does it take so long and how do you put together a recipe? There's also the making of the video. That is pretty time consuming. First, there's the whole setup aspect. I've timed it, set up, getting the camera ready, the mic ready, making sure that I've checked my audio levels. I've got the lighting set up. I've rearranged the kitchen. Oftentimes, I need to clean the kitchen first because my family leaves it looking like a mess. There's dishes and stuff, and I want to have a nice clean kitchen when I'm making my video. So usually I'm looking at 15 minutes to set up, potentially 15 to 30 minutes if I have to clean as well. Then you film the video. And I've got a couple of different camera setups that I use. It's just one camera, but I have different settings that I use depending on whether I'm filming that top-down making the food or filming the intro and outro. And I've learned that filming out of sequence makes sense because then I don't need to do the setup multiple times. I'll set up and I'll make the food, and then afterwards I do the taste test, and then the final thing that I do is the intro. So if I just spoiled the magic for you there, sorry, but the intro is actually the thing that I record last. And then I edit it, and that takes some time. For starters, I cut out a ton of stuff. Now, my videos aren't as tight as like Papa G's, a 2-minute video, but I trim out a significant amount of me talking, ingredient mixing, things of that nature. I would say the end product is probably on the order of a third of what I totally recorded. And it's the same with the podcast too. A 17 to 24 minute podcast, which is usually the range they fall into, I probably record a solid hour of just me talking. So if what's left is boring, you should see what gets cut out. And then, there's the whole editing process, there is the transitions, there's the subtitles if I've got something with ingredients, down at the bottom of the screen, and the rendering and the posting to YouTube, and getting the recipe put into Carb Manager so I can see what the carbs are, getting the recipe loaded up on my website, getting any sort of food pictures taken, and then once it's uploaded on YouTube, making sure the various tags are squared away, that I've got hopefully a decent looking thumbnail, all the appropriate stuff in the description, including the links and any disclaimers, things like that. Generally, I would say for my typical video, which falls somewhere between like 6 and 12 minutes, it is about 6 hours worth of work. So this brings us back to the very first question. So why does it take so long for me to get recipes out or get a cookbook made? Because I'm a one-man show and it takes some time. But I enjoy doing it, and I hope you enjoy watching it. So long as you keep enjoying it and I keep enjoying it, I'll keep doing it. And that's the end of this podcast. Thanks for watching.